Imagine encountering an insurmountable obstacle, a problem that shatters your confidence and exposes your limitations. In this exact moment of profound failure, an invisible divergence occurs, separating those who will eventually conquer the obstacle from those who will forever avoid it. The deciding factor is rarely raw intellect, innate talent, or sheer willpower, but rather a silent, subconscious script running in the background of your mind. This script dictates how you interpret struggle, and understanding it provides a definitive codex for unlocking unparalleled personal transformation. What if the very ceiling you perceive on your abilities is merely an illusion constructed by your own beliefs? Think back to a time when you abandoned a pursuit because it felt too difficult, convincing yourself that you simply lacked the natural gift for it. This rationalization is a universal human experience, a protective mechanism designed to shield the ego from the sting of inadequacy. Yet, this protective shield often becomes a self-imposed prison, restricting your potential and narrowing the trajectory of your life. The discomfort you felt was not a signal to stop, but rather a misinterpretation of the very sensation of cognitive expansion. This profound misinterpretation was meticulously deconstructed by psychologist Carol Dweck during her groundbreaking research at Stanford University. She identified a fundamental dichotomy in human perception, explaining that our underlying beliefs about our own abilities fundamentally shape our lives. She termed the restrictive belief system a fixed mindset, which is the deeply ingrained conviction that intelligence, character, and creative abilities are static traits carved in stone at birth. Operating under this paradigm, every situation becomes an evaluation of these static traits, transforming life into a relentless series of tests where you must constantly prove your worth. If you believe your qualities are unchangeable, then failure is not an event, it is an identity. The individual trapped in this framework avoids challenges, gives up easily, sees effort as fruitless, and feels threatened by the success of others, ultimately plateauing early and achieving far less than their true capability. The transformative alternative to this stagnation is what Dweck defined as a growth mindset, a radical departure from the tyranny of innate talent. This is the empowering conviction that your basic qualities are things you can cultivate and develop through dedication, strategic effort, and input from others. In this expansive framework, the hand you are dealt is just the starting point for development, turning the focus from constantly proving yourself to relentlessly improving yourself. When a person operating with this expansive perspective encounters the exact same insurmountable obstacle mentioned earlier, their internal narrative is fundamentally different. They do not view the struggle as an indictment of their intelligence, but rather as an essential mechanism for acquiring new skills. The failure is processed as neutral data, a necessary and valuable feedback loop that reveals what strategies are ineffective, pointing the way toward what must be learned next. This psychological framework is not merely a comforting philosophy, it is deeply rooted in the biological reality of the human brain through a mechanism known as neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the brain's extraordinary ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life, physically changing its structure in response to learning, experience, and environmental demands. When you struggle, make mistakes, and correct them, your brain is literally building new pathways. Understanding this biological truth completely dismantles the myth that talent is purely innate and unalterable. The brain is far more like a muscle that grows stronger with rigorous use than a fixed vessel with a predetermined capacity. The very act of engaging with difficult material, the friction that the static perspective interprets as a lack of ability, is the precise catalyst required to trigger structural neurological enhancement. This alignment of modern science-backed reality with personal agency echoes the timeless wisdom of Stoicism, an ancient philosophy focused on mastering one's responses to external events. The Stoic imperative dictates that we must distinguish between what is entirely out of our control, like our genetic starting point, and what is within our control, which is our effort, our strategy, and our perception of adversity. By internalizing this ancient wisdom, you fortify your resilience against the inevitable setbacks of any ambitious pursuit. To truly leverage this synthesis of ancient philosophy and modern science, you must fundamentally alter how you approach the acquisition of new skills. True learning requires a deliberate departure from your comfort zone, embracing the confusion and frustration that accompany novel challenges. You must actively seek out the friction, recognizing that the feeling of cognitive strain is the physical sensation of your neural networks expanding and strengthening. Conversely, well-intentioned praise can inadvertently sabotage this development, particularly when society consistently applauds intelligence over effort. When you are praised solely for being smart or talented, you become conditioned to protect that label at all costs, leading you to reject tasks that might expose ignorance. This creates a fragile ego that crumbles under pressure, as the fear of losing the title of genius overrides the primal desire to actually learn and grow. Consider the relentless experimentation of historical innovators who treated thousands of failed prototypes not as personal defeats, but as necessary steps toward eventual triumph. As Thomas Edison famously observed regarding his numerous unsuccessful attempts to create a functional light bulb, he had not failed, he had simply found 10,000 ways that would not work. This is the ultimate manifestation of the expansive perspective in action, where resilience is forged in the fires of persistent strategic iteration. Yet, adopting this perspective requires overcoming powerful internal resistance, often fueled by the fundamental attribution error. This is a cognitive bias where we tend to overemphasize personal characteristics and ignore situational factors in judging others' behavior, leading us to attribute the spectacular achievements of others solely to mystical, innate genius. By falling prey to this bias, we conveniently excuse ourselves from the arduous work required to reach similar heights, falsely believing we lack the necessary genetic lottery ticket. The first crucial step in your systematic self-mastery is to cultivate a hyper-awareness of your own internal dialogue, specifically identifying the moments when the restrictive script takes control. Listen for the voice that whispers you are not smart enough, that you will look foolish, or that it is safer to simply quit. Acknowledging this voice without judgment brings it out of the subconscious shadows, allowing you to intercept and rewrite the narrative before it dictates your actions. Once you have intercepted the restrictive thought, immediately deploy the most potent linguistic tool in the growth arsenal, which is the word yet. When you find yourself thinking that you cannot perform a task, you do not understand a concept, or you are not good at a particular skill, append yet to the end of the sentence. This simple syntactic shift fundamentally alters the trajectory of your thought process, transforming a permanent limitation into a temporary state of developing capability. Furthermore, you must actively reprogram your emotional response to constructive criticism and critical feedback. The static mindset views criticism as a deeply personal attack on character, triggering defensive mechanisms that block out valuable information. To achieve profound personal transformation, you must learn to detach your self-worth from your current level of performance, viewing criticism as a dispassionate diagnostic tool that highlights areas for strategic improvement. By marrying the biological reality of your adaptable brain with these conscious psychological interventions, you create an unstoppable engine for continuous improvement. The friction of challenge is no longer a threat to your identity, but the very fuel required to drive your neurological and intellectual expansion. This synthesis elevates your daily struggles from meaningless suffering to purposeful, systematic adaptation. However, it is critical to avoid the trap of the false growth mindset, a common misunderstanding where one merely praises empty effort without demanding actual progress. Simply trying hard and repeating the same ineffective strategies over and over is not growth. It is the illusion of productivity. True development requires the courage to honestly evaluate your outcomes, discard failing tactics, and actively seek out new strategies and mentors when you are genuinely stuck. This requires implementing a rigorous decision-making framework where you consistently optimize for learning rather than immediate, flawless performance. When presented with two paths, one that guarantees a successful but unchallenging outcome, and another that risks failure but promises immense learning, you must habitually choose the latter. This deliberate choice to embrace difficulty is the hallmark of those who continuously push the boundaries of their own potential. Over time, this deliberate exposure to difficulty builds an architectural framework of psychological resilience that cannot be easily shaken by external circumstances. Because your identity is anchored in the process of becoming, rather than the static state of being, setbacks lose their power to devastate you. You develop an anti-fragile nature, where the shocks and stressors of ambitious pursuits actually serve to make you stronger, sharper, and more adaptable. At its deepest level, adopting this expansive perspective is an embrace of profound existential freedom. You are no longer bound by the arbitrary limitations imposed by your past, your genetics, or the expectations of society. You recognize that the architecture of your mind is a lifelong construction project, and you hold the blueprints, the tools, and the ultimate responsibility for what you build. The echoes of this transformation will resonate through every facet of your existence, fundamentally altering your trajectory in relationships, career, and personal mastery. When you truly believe that abilities can be cultivated, you approach conflicts with a desire to understand. You view career plateaus as invitations to acquire new competencies, and you treat your entire life as a laboratory for relentless optimization. Look closely at the areas in your life where you feel stuck, frustrated, or convinced that you have reached your absolute ceiling. Ask yourself honestly if that ceiling is a physical reality, or if it is merely a psychological construct built by a belief system that fears the vulnerability of trying and failing. The barrier standing between you and your highest aspirations is rarely a lack of capacity, but rather a lack of permission to struggle. Your directive for today is to identify one specific domain where you have historically surrendered to the belief that you lack natural talent. Approach that exact domain with a new strategy, embracing the initial clumsiness, demanding feedback, and reminding yourself that the discomfort is the sensation of your brain physically rewiring itself. Commit to the process of strategic effort, severing the link between your immediate performance and your inherent value as an individual. Mastering the mind is not an event, but a continuous, deliberate practice of choosing expansion over comfort. By internalizing the distinction between these two powerful belief systems, you unlock the ultimate mechanism for enduring achievement and resilience. The Growth Codex is not merely about accumulating knowledge, it is the systematic blueprint for cultivating a life of limitless purpose, transforming the raw material of your potential into profound, undeniable reality.